Kleinert Kutz, Jewish Hospital, University of Louisville, has just completed a bilateral hand transplant. It's the first bilateral hand transplant which we've done here. It's the second that's been done in the country, and I'm not sure who's my data person who knows. I think there's been 4 or 5 done around the world. This was unique, however, because the patient actually had his hands present, but they were scarred, and he couldn't move them. This was from a burn, and therefore we were able to do some things that had not been possible before in hand transplant. We were able to salvage tissue from the hand to help reconstruct the new hand. So in essence, we were able to take a hand from the donor and then drape it or slot it over the structures which we could save in the hand, which were functional and would help it. So it does serve as a potential module for or example of what would take place. I've got to tell you that it was a real coordinated effort. I've asked Dr. Kutz to come here as representative of the Institute and who was involved in this. There were 14 of our fellows who trained. There was input from the University of Louisville. The transplant team has helped us with preparing, the immunosuppression. And there were a number of staff who were my partners who helped in this. This was not me walking in and doing both arms single-handedly or something. And then finally, the people who really started all this were Jewish Hospital. They've been behind this from the very beginning. I think we sometimes forget that the idea of a hand transplant, although it was kind of proposed by us, it was really Jewish Hospital that drove it through and put up the initial funding to get us where we are today.
The Christine Kleinert Fellowship was started a few years ago by Dr. Kleinert and myself in honor of his mother. And the whole purpose was for teaching and to try to advance the surgery of hand surgery and reconstructive surgery in general. We've been very fortunate to have had the blessings of Jewish and sometimes the university and others working with us. And we feel it's a very strong and we feel it's probably the strongest organization like this in the world. There's others that are around, but there's nobody that's trained as many fellows that we have that are as prominent as they are in their own countries. And we feel it's a very worthwhile. And we're just hoping to continue for the next 50 or 60 years before I decide to retire. But we want to thank you all for coming, and we have a long way to go to know if this is going to survive, but it looks very good at this point. And I'm just hoping that this is just the beginning, as we have in the past, and continue to have more of these successes. Thank you.
Questions kind of guide you through this? I think we were 20 hours, 19 hours. We started at 9:30 last night, and we took the patient off the table at about 2:30, whatever that works out to.
Can you tell us anything about the patient at all, without the identity and the nature of the injuries?
Well, yes, it was a burn injury, and what makes it unique, and I'm sure, I don't really know if it'll be controversial. I know when we first looked at it, we had a lot of controversy as we discussed it in our group. The patient has his hands. Every hand transplant that's been done before didn't have hands. He had had multiple operations, and they basically were dysfunctional. Now, when I say not functional, if he was in a public place and wanted to use the bathroom, he couldn't unzip his zipper. He had to ask someone to do it for him. When he would eat something, he had to, he would have to cradle it kind of like this. He couldn't get keys out of his pockets. If he was out in public and his keys got too deep, he had to ask someone to help him reach in his pocket. So the first question is, how do you reconstruct someone like this? The conventional methods had all been tried and left him in that state. So he's the first person who came in with hands present, saying, I'd rather have an amputation than continue to live this way. The second thing to know about this case, which I alluded to, is we used the nerves. It's a little complicated. We used the nerves from the patient in the transplanted hand. So instead of using the nerves in the transplanted hand, we used the nerves from the patient to get out as close to the place they needed to go to and then hook them up. So if you lose your hand and I transplant it at this level, I have to get the nerve to grow all the way down to get to the tip of the finger to get feeling. What we did here is, after we took his hand off, we left the nerves running out to each of the fingers that weren't there and then slotted the new hand on top of it and hooked up the nerves. And
how many hours were spent on each of the hands, and were there complications with either one that you would want to discuss?
well, I don't know if you call them complications. I would say it's much more like the military saying, you know, you have plans and they last as long as till you have contact with the enemy. We have plans, but it rarely, in a case as complicated as this, runs completely normal. So the things that were surprises, and we were working on two teams. On my side, there was more scarring than I anticipated, which made closure and doing some of the vascular work more difficult. We lost about 8 units of blood, which isn't necessarily surprising, but I think it's a little more than I would like to, although it's kind of like a controlled slide, you might say. I mean, if you're going to lose blood, you want to make sure that you don't put the patient in any jeopardy from it, and there are certain things you have to do. And so I wouldn't list any of those as complication. We know when we're doing bilateral, if someone comes in with both arms off and we're putting them on, we often lose a lot of blood as we're trying to do it. The real issue right now is going to be the next 24, 48 hours, which is critical, because if the vascular reconstruction fails, it's most likely to do that in the next 24 or 48 hours. And then the next critical element is we go out to make sure there's not rejection and we start looking to get function back and all that.
Are you pleased with how it went?
Well, yeah.
You have probably a different answer in 24 to 48 hours, but how do you feel right now?
No, I feel very good, because I guess the thing that's hard to realize is, I mean, this patient's been 3 years trying to get here. And, I've been there all along. I would have liked to have transplanted him 1 month after we met him, but there's steps we both need to go through. I mean, they need to be screened, and we need to get approval, and then we need to go through informed consent. So it's a long process. So when you finally get there and you spend 20 hours and you're with a team of people that you've worked with for many years, and you come out feeling like you've really accomplished something, I think I'm very fortunate to be a surgeon, to have come to this group, to have been with Jewish Hospital, and to have had the opportunity to do this and help people like this patient. I'll be more pleased 3 weeks from now if everything's going smoothly.